Thank you all for joining us today for the Pulitzer Center's deeper look into solitary confinement and mass incarceration. As we wait for more folks to join us, please let us know in the chat where you're listening in from. And we invite you to share, if you would like to, whether you are a survivor of solitary confinement or if a family member or someone else is. I am Ann Peters from the Pulitzer Center, and our conversation today is an extension of last week's powerful performances of The Box, and very much a continuation of the Pulitzer Center's Focus on Justice online series from earlier this year. You'll find in the chat a link to that series and the related recorded conversations if you'd like to catch up on that. And we also hope to add shortly a recording of The Box at our website if you did miss it. So far, we're glad to see we have folks from San Francisco, from Washington, D.C., from Naples, Florida, San Jose, California. We really appreciate your being with us today. Savannah, Georgia, Philadelphia, Sacramento. I could go on and we'll keep letting you know where folks are listening in from. We believe it is critical, especially at this moment in our history, to keep those issues of justice at the forefront of our reporting at the Pulitzer Center and our conversations. For those who have not joined with us before, the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit journalism and education organization based in Washington, D.C., and we support more than 170 reporting projects each year on global and local issues. On our website, pulitzercenter.org, we bring together this work by themes, including racial justice, indigenous communities, criminal justice, environment, and more. We have developed a strong university partnership and program that includes visits with journalists and awards for reporting fellowships for students from our 35 plus university partners. On the K through 12 front, we reach thousands of students and educators as well through visits and professional development workshops. And we organize public events like this. And of course, last week's first ever virtual performances of The Box, working with Sarah Shourd, who you'll hear from today, as well as actor Damian Brown, and of course, the rest of that terrific cast. A few housekeeping matters. Our aim is to incorporate audience questions as part of today's conversations, and you'll see a Q&A icon on your screen. Please add your questions as soon as something comes to mind at any time during the conversation. There's also a chat icon that is more for technology. If you have any issues, note that all attendees are muted, or if you can't hear us at some time, please say so in the chat. We'll also be recording this session to post online for others who could not attend today. If you'd like to tweet, please use the hashtag #JusticeFocus. And on one final note, please remember to stay online once our conversation ends to learn about related event upcoming this weekend, and then to participate in a brief survey. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Playwright Sarah Shourd is a multimedia award-winning journalist, artist, and former Stanford John S. Knight Fellow. She is a survivor of solitary confinement herself. And among her works over the last decade is an anthology of testimony she collected from prisoners during a 3-year investigation into solitary confinement in prisons across the US. The Box is based on those investigations. Damian Brown is an actor, artist in residence at the Marin Shakespeare Company and formerly incarcerated citizen. Damian performed the title role of Othello at the Marin Shakespeare Company in 2016, for which he won the honor of Best Lead Actor from the Bay Area Theater Critics Circle. He played Ray in the virtual performance of The Box last week. Liz Ogbo is a designer, urbanist, and spatial justice activist, an expert on engaging and transforming unjust urban environments. Her multidisciplinary design and innovation practice, Studio O, operates at the intersection of racial and spatial justice. Please welcome our guests, and I'll turn it over to Liz now.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thanks to all of you who are tuning in. I'm really excited and feeling quite privileged to be a part of this conversation. As Anne mentioned, we'll be getting to Q&A later on, but also know that over the course of doing the Box performances last week and this weekend, we actually collected questions from the audience then. So some of that will be sprinkling into the conversation that I'm going to be having on the front piece of this dialogue today. So Sarah and Damian, thank you so much for for being in dialogue with me. I'm super excited to get into the weeds of all of this stuff. You know, one thing that I wanted to start with, and it was something that's like informed by a number of the questions that came through, is just understanding a little bit of almost the mechanics and the creative endeavor of turning these stories, which arguably are challenging stories that we even struggle to engage with from a journalistic perspective, to turn it into a play. So I wanted, since you both operate in different sides of that operation, I wanted to talk to you, Sarah, first about why did you write this play? Why did you take these stories that you had collected and turn it into a play? And then also, like, why this medium now? I've seen the box when it was staged at Alcatraz, which was powerful, but it seems a whole thing to bring it onto Zoom. So why that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I came back from my year in prison, I was held as a political hostage in Iran in 2009 and 10. I was living in the Middle East at the time and working as a journalist. And when I came back to the US after my own horrific experience, I needed to connect with other people in prison that had had that experience to begin to understand what had happened to my own mind. So I was writing letters to people and reaching out just to find community and to feel less devastatingly alone. And I was working, I'm a journalist, so I was doing investigations into solitary confinement and writing articles, and it just didn't feel like enough for me. I wanted to reach people in the most visceral way possible. I think a lot of people are convinced by the facts, the data, you know, the astronomical numbers of people that are held in isolation in our prisons. It's 80 to 100,000 a day. And the amounts of time where you don't see in any other country in the world or any country in history, you know, decades of in isolation. A lot of people are convinced by that, and some people aren't. Some people have never met someone that's been in solitary confinement, let alone some people have never met anyone that's been in prison. And for me, the stories are both a way to reach those people and make one person real, let alone 80,000. And it's also a way to, you know, to honor the survivors. All of my work is geared towards connecting with and honoring survivors.
And what made you, having successfully staged this play and several other iterations, what made you decide to bring it to Zoom?
I mean, it was Natalie Applewhite at the Pulitzer Center. It was her idea. And when we did the Alcatraz performance, Dameion was there last year, and the Pulitzer Center helped us do that. They produced it. And yeah, at first I thought, well, no, everything that I love about theater is its visceralness and the fact that people are gathering together in proximity. That's what art, you know, art is it's like a hearth or a fire around people can gather and reignite their spiritual connection and heal. How can you do that on Zoom? You know, that's like Zoom is a way that it reduces us, it diminishes us and puts us in boxes. And then it puts us in boxes, right? There is it's sort of the dehumanization of solitary confinement is baked into the technology of Zoom in the design. Not that, you know, Zoom, I'm glad that it exists and it ended up being a really powerful way to tell this story, but it's still a crude platform that, you know, you lose some of that visceral power, but I think that the visceral power was regained by the fact that actors were in their own homes, literally just pouring themselves into this little green dot on their computer, their laptops, right into the audience's home. And I think that intimacy was reignited by that direct contact.
Yeah, I'd have to say, as someone who has seen it both when it was staged in a like physical environment versus like watching it, there was like a intimacy of, it was like I was looking through that porthole in a way that when I could see it in a physical space, I got so much more of them. And this one, it was like, oh no, this is the only contact I have with their humanity. And so in some ways, the limitation of the device, I think, actually worked in certain ways around that intimacy. Absolutely. Damien, I'm curious, like from the perspective of someone acting it, what first did it mean? Why did you even want to do this play? What did it mean to engage with this play? And then how did it feel to do it in this format?
Damien,
Oops, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, bad habit. Fortunately, I had done Othello, and unfortunately, I had mismanaged the experience. So I had felt all of the heavy weight that can come after repeating a painful role. So I was mindful of that entering into this, but it's still difficult. I agreed to do it because I don't believe that I'll ever see myself separate from the affected class and of those incarcerated, mass incarcerated. And I also don't see myself separated from those who have not directly experienced the institution of that castle of 1,000 dungeons, so to speak. So, feeling that way, I know that there are a lot of men and women who are in that situation. And they don't ever expect to have that story told. We didn't ever expect to have the ears, the heart, the morality, the hope for humanity from a decent person out there who didn't know about us. We didn't expect that. So it was interesting hearing Sarah speak of your experience in dealing with this, being isolated and locked away. Yours, you had nothing to really gauge, to measure that by. It was your first experience. In my situation, we grew up with it. We grew up seeing people caught up in a rapture, is what we spoke of it as. People you saw today and then they disappeared. And then you may have saw them again 10 years later. This happened all around where I live. So the resilience is there. That's not always a good thing. It's good to be resilient, I think, but it is a bad thing to have to get used to living in an inhumane way, to living constantly hunted. So I felt that it would be honorable to come forth and show as much as I could from an artistic perspective of a person who acts and from a person who has experienced it and felt the lash, to give you as much of my real experience that I felt and that I saw, to give you a little bit, and hopefully you see those men I left behind, or whatever that can do with humanity. And that's why I do it. And no matter how much it hurts, I will still do that because I know it hurts our world more to keep it like it is.
Yeah, thank you. I'm struck by, in telling this story and in communicating this story, one of the things as I watched it this time around was I felt the complexity of the story, the layers of the story that we don't normally talk about. When you hear about solitary confinement or even prisons in the news, it's a very simplified version of what's happening. And in the stories that you brought to the screen, and both Damian as an actor and Sarah as a writer and director, it almost forced us to look at those layers and see them in their complexity. And so I wonder if you could, and start with you, Damian, just connect, what does it mean to show that this is not a simple story? What does it mean to ask us to hold that it's not black and white, right? Like black and white in terms of racial dynamics, but even then, there's like many shades of gray that are important to understand this in terms of who's connected to whom, who's complicit in what, who's carrying what baggage, who's in relationship with one another. What does it mean to hold all of that?
To hold all of that is, wow. And I don't know how many people are familiar with cable and the way that signals are passed, but it kind of reminds me of a coaxial cable. People who have not spent time really immersed in this social injustice as a target, their knowledge around the field may be like a coaxial cable. And a coaxial cable is an avenue to get information, but it's thick, but it doesn't give as much information as a light cable, as internet, though that superhighway. It can hold so much more. And I think as people, I have gone through, unfortunately, a situation that has made me high-speed internet. And I'm trying to give information in many cases to people who are still coaxial. So there's attenuation. When I start giving all of the information that I have, they can't receive it because they don't have the experience by which to process this information. So it's a lot of spill off, a lot of things they really can't feel. So in telling this story, just like we're peeping through a slot when we were talking like this, this is what you're seeing into the world that we really live in. You're seeing just a little bit through that slot. There's so much that one tries to convey through micro expressions and pauses. There's so much in everything about that play. The silence, there are things that can't be, there are moments that can't be captured. And we try and get you as close to that moment just to spark your curiosity and hoping you'll come in the door and not just peep through the tray slot so you can really see it all. I hope that made some sense, but there's so much information in here and I don't know, I'm not always sure how to get it all out to the people.
No, it was a very helpful visual, I think. And it made me curious as I hear what you're describing of the experience. I'm curious, Sarah, as you were both collecting the stories and then figuring out how you could share these stories, is what Damian described, was that in the back of your mind of what you were trying to do, or is it something that is sort of broken open as you've sort of seen the play be acted out and stretch to achieve all that it could?
Yeah. I mean, I think Damian said it really well. The frustration and also the art, right, of storytelling is how much you, how to reach your audience, right? How to know your audience and meet them where they're at. I mean, my goal partially in this was more than creating an experience that can help anyone who's never been in solitary confinement even begin to understand what it is. And also because you can't, I mean, I'm still understanding it a decade later. I mean, the subtleties of the human mind and what happens to it when it's corrupted in that way, you know, strangulated. It's something that we, you know, we can't even begin to understand spiritually and emotionally. We're still learning from each other, right? And plus, I don't want to subject my audience to psychological torture. I want them to feel the humanity of the people subjected to that. If they have even if they believe in an abstract way, these people are human beings, I want them to feel it and know it and never be able to forget it. And also that speaks to the first question of why Zoom and why this moment, is I was hopeful that this moment would resonate, you know, that we're in a pandemic of loneliness, that people are suffering in a way, the disconnect from their families, you know, not being able to see their loved ones when they're sick or ailing or visiting them through glass. There's so many parallels to the prison experience. Not to say that it's the same by any means, but it's an opening for empathy. And that's what storytelling always is people have to mine their own experience on some level. They have to have some way to access it, I think, to truly be changed by these stories. And so Did that answer your question?
Yeah, you did. And I actually think that there's something interesting in when we had this conversation before, where you discussed about this pandemic of loneliness, and we're in this really interesting place where there are the people that we have traditionally not seen or underseen actually have the wisdom of engaging with this moment.
Yeah.
And I think in both of your answers, it's this thing of like, well, what can we learn from them? Like, how can that be a teacher for us to understand how to be, how to exist, how to negotiate the complexities of what is happening around us. And I wonder, to that point, Sarah, could you talk a little bit more about not just how this might then talk about how to negotiate the moment of being in isolation, but it seems another thread that went through the box rather strongly is the larger systems of oppression and the contention that we're having with that right now. And so can you talk about what you see as the parallels between the conversation happening in the box with the conversation that's happening out in the streets right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, it's a play about resistance and about collective resistance against incredible odds and obstacles. And a lot of people have asked about, when I ask, does this play leave you feeling hope? People will say, yes, but I wanted to know more about what came after, right? And so just a little taste of that is that the 2013 California prisoner hunger strike that happened in California that the play is based on. Over 30,000 prisoners went on hunger strike. And since then, the ripple effects continue. A lot of those guys, men and women, have gotten out and are engaging with their community. My friend Michael Saavedra is working on an amazing project. He was one of the hunger strikers. He's working on a project down in LA with the Youth Justice Coalition that's training former gang members and using the sort of hierarchical paramilitary-esque infrastructure of gang culture to train peacekeepers, where people are going out and responding to conflicts in Los Angeles, in the community, disarming, basically taking the role of the police back into the community's hands. So I guess I just want to make that connection. To me, the hope in the story lies on the individual level and individuals' ability to transform, because I think all the characters transform in some way, in a way that's grounded in the real. But also, yeah, the collective resistance is something that we're all trying to figure out how to do right now to stay connected against the obstacle of this, pandemic. How do we still organize? How do we still stand up to power? And how do we come out of this pandemic stronger in our movements our movements for safety and justice?
And in that toggle between the sort of personal and the systemic, I'm also really curious that there's one of the things that there is a strong overtone in the play, but also that we see playing out in the streets is the racial context, the system of white supremacy as it relates. So as you balance the personal with this institutional fight, how does it, I mean, you're very obviously presenting as the white woman. How do you negotiate what it means to be, even though you are someone who has experienced solitary confinement and incarceration, how do you negotiate what it means to be a white woman who's experienced that versus people of color who make up the vast majority of where the focus often ends up being and where the harm ends up being when we talk about the carceral system?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I appreciate you driving that question home and not sorry if I was a little obtuse, Liz. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I came back from prison knowing what solitary confinement was for me. I also, Damian was gracious enough to kind of talk about the differences in our experiences. And if I had stayed a political hostage for 20 years, I never would have been forgotten. My experience in prison itself had so much privilege. and I came out with a tremendous amount of privilege. And the only way I could tell these stories is to listen to people, you know, to absolutely to step back from my own story. My own story, all it was is the jumping place for me to not be able to look away, to never, ever be able to forget that tens of thousands of people are suffering what I did for much longer periods. And so the listening is I think essential to being a white anti-racist, is to be able to step outside of your own story and really look at the world and, you know, and step out of your own. I mean, white fragility is a real thing. And every time we do this play, it's absolutely essential for me to do my own work as a white person and an anti-racist, in order for that, the goal of the collaboration is racial healing, and is for the anti-racist work to be embedded in our process as collaborators. And so that's why it's a play written by a survivor in collaboration with other survivors. I'm constantly in the position of following other people's experiences and trying to get outside of the limitations of my own in order to understand them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Damian, I'm curious. It's a build off of what Sarah just said, but it might feel like a little bit of a turn. That as we think about what it might be to understand a different way of being and different systems that are working, that one parallel between what I saw in the box and what I'm seeing out in the world right now is kind of acceptance that the systems in many ways have sort of abandoned us, right? And abandoned key populations. And that it is almost incumbent, and frankly has been all this time, for these populations to kind of come together, these communities to come together and develop their own system of relationships, their own system of care, their own system of accountability. And I felt like that really played out in your relationship with your fellow prisoners in the play. And I wonder if you could talk more about how you see that as potentially being, you know, as we talk about what does safety mean, what does trust mean, where is the intersection of all of that, and thinking about where do we need to pivot to?
Right. I think the fact is we all enter this space coming from where we've been, right? And our clarity on where we've been is not always the same. Everybody doesn't understand the past that they have experienced. There are a lot of people who are incarcerated for very long times who still don't really understand how they ended up where they are. So it is not, we can't just assume because we enter the room that we bring our awareness. We could come in the room and be made aware. And I think that's where we should be. I think coming into a space with understanding what we already know, we have to be ready to lay it down, because the people who I loved and trusted the most in this world, that I think I had the best mom and pop provided from the heavens. But there are some things that they taught me when I was younger that I do not subscribe to today. So I know that they had their best intentions in building me up. But there are some things that they really wanted me to have that I know that I cannot use in this world that I live in now. It does not fit the world that I want to live in. So I make a choice with those that I love the most to utilize those things that they provided me that can help me to live in the type of world that I really want to live in, that matches their morality as they gave it to me and my own. I think we should do the same thing with the government. I think that we should look at what they say, look at what they propose. And I think that collectively we should really feel, do we really agree? Is this where we want to move? And be willing to say, no, this is not what we're doing. And we're not accepting you doing this in our name. I think that's we, the people. I think that that's how we're supposed to move. And I think we've fallen into a pattern of do as you're told. Don't make waves. Be comfortable. Be safe. Reimagine safety. What is it to be safe? Who's the authority? What makes authority? We have to revisit all those things because you said something that was very interesting, Liz, and I believe it's true in a lot of circles about our systems, our institutions have abandoned us. I see that a little differently being who I am. I believe that the system has been spotlighted and now is under a microscope and seeing that it is functioning the way that it was always intended to function against certain people. Now that we know that, we have to decide, and when I say we, I mean all of us who came into this awareness. Never mind how much melanin you may find in your skin, we're aware. Now we have to ask ourselves sincerely, is this the world we want? Is it the world we want? And if it's not, what are we willing to sacrifice? What are we willing to do together to ensure that our message is given loudly and clearly that we're not going to do this? When we start reaching that, and we'll then start seeing our people, those who share that unifying spirit, who really want to unify and make things better for all people. This is the spirit that I think we should be pushing towards. So we have to bring everything that we know to the table and reevaluate it. What is safety? What is 911 for? Does every situation require a gun? What do we do? What do I have in my neighborhood right now that could make things better? What can I do when I leave my house to make things better? It's really not complex. I'm sorry, I'll go on a tangent. It's so much here. But I think that we make things more complicated when we have an interest to keep the things like they are. And I think when people say, hey, we should just put a speed bump right here, then a politician comes up with all the complications. Oh, this could be, you can't just put it out there. You have to go through. Why do we have to go through that? Mm-hmm. Case in point, and I'll rest on this. We were murdered. We've been murdered in these streets for a long time. Everybody has seen it. That's not a question. So seeing this stuff go on, at no point did our government or anyone say, you know what, murder, wholesale slaughter of people is innocent, it's wrong. We have to stop doing this. Now, as a citizen, I have to, when I think about my hope, when I have hope, I always measure my hope by, are there ways and means to achieve it? And I hope that we start making better policy. But I look back at the history of this nation and I cannot lie to myself. I cannot think of one time, not once, and I don't know everything in history, and if someone knows, I would appreciate them sharing, whereby the evils of unchecked authority has on their own morality said, you know what, wait a minute, we're not selling any more of these young Black children up the river and separating these families and keeping people out here, beating them with whips and depriving them of land. That's wrong. You know what? Here's a decree. We're no longer doing this anymore, people. Our government has never done that. And had good people never challenged it, it would still be expressly happening just the way it was happening in 1750. This is a fact. So I cannot delude myself into thinking that all of a sudden, this government is going to get a moral awakening. So it's on the people. So it's on the yous and means. And I think that that really makes us see each other better, because if I want what I need to get done for my betterment, I have to listen to what you need. How can we do this together? And that's the work. And that's what keeps me up at night. And that's what gets me up early in the morning, trying to find that. And forgive me for my tangent, but it's so much in here.
No, this is one of those times where I'm really annoyed that Zoom does not have the snaps function, because I would be just clicking that. All of that, I think, is exactly right. And I think, as taking in all that you said, and really this idea that we've never seen it be different, and that the system is working exactly as designed.
Right.
I think about, where do we go next, right? So defund the police is, the rallying cry that we're hearing right now. And it is important, but I want to almost be like, yes, and, right? Because I think the things that you're talking about expand beyond that and suggest that what we almost need is a wholesale revision of the terms and conditions of how we operate with one another and what we define as our society. And so in my work, I do a lot of dreaming into the future. And it's not so much to sort of ignore the realities of the present, but it's almost to acknowledge that so much of when we propose new things are tweaks in the system that is creating the harm, that we're almost so deep in the shadow of it that it becomes impossible to see, well, what would it actually look like if that shadow did not exist anymore? And so I want to ask both of you, before we turn it over to audience questions, what is that dream? What, if we are reimagining public safety, or I almost don't want to even use that phrase because I feel like that phrase is deeply embedded in the structures we're trying to replace. So that thing that we're looking at that connects to the hope that you mentioned, what would that look like in your minds? What would you see within that?
In my mind, this is so very clear, although the path to get there isn't, but I'm willing to go on it. But I see us being aboard at the word police, because we are a nation who are educated now, and we know where its origins came from, and that doesn't sit well with us. So we created something different. We didn't feel that everything needs to be redesigned. Some things need to be raised to the ground, and then something else should be reimagined. I think that we should reimagine gangs as boldly as we subconsciously have already reimagined the police. We know already that there are cells of police officers who have joined an oath to do evil. So police, we often think are opposite than gangs, but we know there are gangs inside of the police department. So if we know that and we move on like it's normal, why can't we look the same way at former gang members who have a structure, who have a moral guiding center that they go through to make certain that everybody understands the expectation of this high office of being a peacekeeper or a de-escalator, and allow them to do that? Where is it different? But we'll look at gangs, we'll hear that word gang and we'll panic. And we'll hear that word police and we'll get comfortable. When we have evidence to suggest both has been, gang members have served as police, the police have served as gang members. We need to reimagine it, because what we're doing now is not working. We can't escape truths. Burying our head in the sand is putting a knife in the hearts of all of our children in the future. If we mess this up, we know what we're consigning them to. So we have to get in. And now I'm even being told by my friends, hey, stay away from Richmond, stay away from East Oakland, because they're losing it. I'm afraid for them. I'm not afraid of them. So we have to do it. We have to do the work, because I see the change. We can think big. Hey, you have a cell phone, I can be anywhere in the world with this. We imagine this, and we can't think anything better than a dungeon. I don't believe that. What human being is standing in the way of that reimagining? That's someone that's standing in the way of the longevity of humankind. We can't go on like this. We're going to kill each other. We're already killing the planet. The next we go at one another. We can do better than that. So let's reimagine that. Let's reimagine the police. Let's reimagine politicians. Why should they be forever? Why should it be a lifelong career? Why can't they have a job too and come and do that part-time? Why is there why do we allow any type of lobbying? Whose great idea was it to embed bribery into a political system and make it okay? It's a lot wrong. And we can't be afraid to go in and change something. Stick it out a while and see if it works before we abandon it. But we know this isn't working. So we're being insane, running this thing over and over and over. So I'm with the change whenever people want to do those things. I'm reimagining the policing right now in the Bay Area and defunding the police. I know that's the D word is terrifying to people, but I think we should get rid of the police, period. And I think we should create community response teams for the various things that happens in a community. You have psychological issues, you have emotional things that go on, and we have professionals in abundance who can meet those things. So there's so many little things that we imagine this for those of you who really love the police, the idea of the police. Okay, let's say we stick with that. So how does my son or myself or my daughter not be murdered in the streets by a racist cop? Well, maybe if we're going to go with the police, we say, all right, every community, especially Black and brown communities, we have to build that especially in there in the beginning. There must be at least 60% of the police officers who should live in this community. They should be from this community. Now, I'm not saying that Bob Smith from El Dorado Hills, so to speak, has to come and move in Hunters Point. He doesn't have to. I'm saying this should be a reason to get people from Hunters Point to be police officers. But then we have to address another issue. Well, he can't be a police officer because he can't have a weapon. Why can't he have a weapon? Because we tagged him with a felony when he was 18. So neutralized. Most of the time he can't vote. Disarmed politically, disarmed physically. Now you can't even be a police officer in your neighborhood. Change the rules. There are police officers who have committed murder that everybody saw and they're still police officers. Why can't the guy who moved some drugs 10 years ago become a police officer? What is this stubborn fear against us? Any semblance of us being on equal footing is a threat. Any semblance. We can't accept that. Good white people, good Black people, good people should be pissed off daily as long as that exists. Because I promise you, I could go out there tomorrow. I've been in these situations. I could get pulled over and murdered unjustly on camera, and that cop's gonna get away with it. And all they're gonna say is, well, you know, Damian Brown was no stranger to the law. That makes it okay. There was a question, and I'll share this and I'll stop. I saw a question someone asked, what did he do to go to prison? That's public information. There's no way I could hide that if I wanted to. But I immediately become concerned that my audience has missed my message, if that's the first question they have. I feel like you've just been looking at me, waiting on a chance to ask that, and I don't know where that's gonna serve you. I don't know where that's gonna serve us. So while I can give you that answer, is that the only question you have? You know, we have to do more, and we have to look at the things that matter. I'm done. Thank you.
But I think in your reimagining this, all the things you were saying, I was sort of looking at, like, how do we strip things down, right, to their barest essence, and hold who are people really? What are the roles we actually need? What are the relationships we actually need? That to have a conversation about reimagining, we have to ask that, ask what are the rules, and how, and who do they serve and who they don't serve. So in some ways, I almost feel like your answer to that question almost laid out a process or the path, even though you said you didn't have the path. I think asking all of those questions are kind of essential to it. Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts. What does reimagining look like?
Yeah, I think that reimagining is really hard work. I think that our hearts have been crushed in many ways by these systems of oppression. I mean, working every day, hearing stories of the way people's lives are destroyed by our prison system, you have to constantly be pushing yourself to imagine something different. And that's hard to do when maybe you haven't experienced it. I mean, many of us haven't. I mean, in a real sense, none of us have, right? What we're trying to imagine has never existed on the planet. I come from a family, generations of trauma, of women being harmed by men. And I think that a part of what keeps me in the work around transformative justice, prison abolitionism, is that that in order to imagine and create a world where safety is a reality, you have to also, each of us has to relearn what it feels like to be safe in our own bodies. I mean, we inherit generations of trauma, and that repair just hasn't been done. I mean, what my soul yearns for more than anything is stories of repair, of families finding a way to repair outside of the prison system, victims and their perpetrators. And that work is really being done. That is the work of abolitionism. My next project is definitely going to be focused on, we need more of those stories of how people heal together and repair, because we live in an incredibly violent world. And I feel like enough of us, we need to convince everyone that the prisons are making it more violent, but we also need to show the alternative and the solutions, because they exist too. They're just underfunded, ignored, and not scaled nearly to what they need to be. But people need to believe in those stories and live those stories, as well as the stories of, the horror and the failure of our institutions.
Thank you. So, of course, as typical of these things, we have a lot of questions and not a lot of time. So I'm going to suggest that some of the more there's one about, is the show going to go on the road, and translating it to other languages and in other contexts, that maybe those are things that could be answered via the Pulitzer's website on a blog or something like that. But one question that it strikes me that actually I've seen reflected here, but also came up in the questions that we saw with the performance is, we've just casted a vision of a world where we're reimagining, where things look different. And you've talked about some pretty big things that are required to get there. But I think sometimes people just need to know, what's the next thing I should do? What can I do tomorrow with the world that it is, but that I'm ready to fight for this change? I want to participate in it. I don't want to be complicit in the harm. What's one thing that I can do? And I know there's always more than one, but if we were to leave people with just like a provocative nugget, what is one thing that you would say that you are calling in someone to do if they really want to support this work?
I guess I can start. Or Damien, do you want to start?
He's passing the buck to you.
I have so much, I'm going to need time to bring it down to one. So you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people ask specifically about solitary confinement, and really this state by state, a lot of restrictions have been put on solitary confinement. And solitary confinement is a control mechanism that enables mass incarceration. It's one way that states and the federal government are able to warehouse such an astronomical number of human beings is by the threat of torture, that you can disappear the people that are organizing against their conditions, that you can disappear the mentally ill into a box where they're only going to get worse and decompensate, and then you don't have to treat them, and you don't have to rehabilitate, because you can use the tool of torture to silence. And so by taking away that tool, there is a shift towards rehabilitation. Also, so solitary confinement is part of the project of abolitionism and of envisioning a world where we don't need prisons and we don't rely on prisons, and anything that we do to protect victims and to solve violence is going to be a community led healing approach. And so people, I say, look at your local, it all starts locally. As far as putting pressure against this practice and against mass incarceration, look at your local groups. You can look into Solitary Watch if you want to, which does amazing work that I've been working with for the last decade. Writing prisoners is literally a lifeline. The prisoner-led hunger strike that the play is based on from 2013, the inside-outside connections that enabled that to get international publicity and attention, and so for so many people to join, and now over 3,000 people have been let out of solitary confinement or the SHU in California as a result of the lawsuit that came from it. So all of these actions, a lot of them will depend on inside-outside relationships. So like really lending transparency to a prison system that just thrives off of having, no transparency whatsoever by starting these relationships. And I think also on a personal note, when I'm just talking about repair, how can we as individuals start that repair in our own lives, in all of our most important relationships with our families, and if we all need to be doing that work to create the alternative.
Great, thank you. Damian, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah. One thing, I think there's one thing on every front, but I think the most important thing, I would say the most important thing, is to brace yourself, if you don't already have it, move yourself towards truth of the history of this place and these people in this place. A lot of the ability to keep this charade going on has largely depended on people to accept the information, the story, as it has been given to you. And you feel that you have a stronger control over that information because you're looking at the fact, you're really looking at someone speaking or giving something versus your mind receiving it. We tend to think that, well, I can handle that. But what we don't take into consideration while this is going on is that's not the only method of giving you this information. When you turn on the television, we're represented as criminals more time than we are. You're seeing that. You're seeing a world that shows you a lot of the wonderful things and it looks like you. And you see a world that shows some of the bad things and then it looks like me. And you go to these beautiful places and you look and you see you and you don't see me. And so that's how it becomes easy to make me synonymous to bad, me synonymous to guilty, me synonymous to indifference. If you think that a person is less than human, if you're one of those people who have bought into believing that there is some bell curve going on with these Black folk and eugenics is accurate and they just can't seem to get this, if you really bought into that, you need to be educated And the information is out there. There was a great TED talk that was given with Marin, a gentleman who gave one on the origins of racism, a white guy. I really advise people watch it because he was very impressive. It's important for us to move like that. And anytime you get rid of a lie, you empower people. You have a lot of people really thinking that they are inherently better or superior to me. Now that is a joke, a laughable joke to me, because I know that we are one and we have the same 24 hours in a day, period, we're humans. But people accept it and we don't correct them. We still have schools that push that lie, the Columbus lie and everything else. We even had one book, McGraw-Hill said something about volunteering. We were volunteers as slaves. Nonsense like that has to be gotten rid of. And we have to say, hey, no, these people are not slow. They're not lazy. They built a country for free. They're not lazy. They're not slow. And even if they ain't working, built the country for free. Let them rest. But you're looking at these things and you hold them as true. And then you create a world around that truth and wonder why these people are not excelling. Just stop lying. Stop supporting lies. Watch what your child, people who call themselves white, or who, watch what your child is learning in school about history. I will always push the importance of history more than anything because it's where I remember losing my confidence in the classroom. I was great at math. I was great at science, loved art. I loved all those things. But when we would get to that part of history, when they started talking about slave ships, I went from this to that is torture. No one has ever questioned what happens to a Black child in class when she is equal to everyone in that room, excels in some areas until history, and they disengage. And that makes boys, I saw that make boys in my class disengage from math, disengage from science. That is more powerful than we are behaving. History, it was important enough for people to lie about it and to push it and keep it as the standard. So it has to be important enough to debunk. So I think we should get very serious about teaching accurate history. Otherwise, people are starting off on a false pretense. And it's gonna really be hard to get anywhere if you start off stuck on stupid.
And I have nothing to add to that. Sarah, Damien, I just wanna thank you both for sharing your wisdom with us. And I really do believe it is wisdom. I think, you know, we started off with a conversation about the play and solitary confinement, but I think that you've really charted a path of that to understand how to be in this world, how not only to take down those systems, but all the systems that harm us. It's really about this larger conversation that requires both the internal and external journey. So I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. I'm going to invite Ann Peters from the Pulitzer Center to step back in and leave us with some parting words and housekeeping.
Thank you. My parting words are not as powerful as what we just heard. And just thank you to Damien, to Sarah, to Liz for bringing us all together today for this conversation. And thanks to our audience. As Liz said, we weren't able to get to all the questions, and we will aim to answer some more when we post the video from today's conversation in the coming days. Thanks to my colleagues also at the Pulitzer Center, especially Holly Peipenberg, our producer for this session. And we want to thank our donors, including the Art for Justice Fund, which has supported our Focus on Justice series and our reporting and education outreach on mass incarceration and related justice issues. We appreciate all of you for joining us today, and for those who are able, please support our mission as well with any level of contribution. Remember, the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit journalism organization, and so we depend on donors to carry on our work. We wanted to let you know that this Sunday, we're continuing our focus on justice, looking into filmmaking and activism, as well as spotlighting reporting on detention during COVID, with filmmaker Catherine Gund, Restore Justice Executive Director Adnan Khan, and Pulitzer Center journalist grantee Emily Cassie. That will be this Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Pacific. One of those conversation touchstones will be the documentary Aggie, which centers on the story of art collector and philanthropist Agnes Gund, Catherine's mother and the person who created the Art for Justice Fund. So please register for Sunday's session at pulitzercenter.org, and there'll also be an opportunity to see the film. Stay with us just a few more moments to take a brief survey as we officially close today's session. And once again, just a great amount of gratitude to Sarah and Damian and Liz for your time today and for your work. Thank you back to our audience as well for being with us, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.